Okay. Is it on? Oh, yeah. Yeah, just press and hold it. Great. Okay, well, welcome to,
You're ready.
welcome to folks in the room and folks online are watching the recording of this video. This is, it's June 2nd. We are going to be presenting on the kind of current updates from our mill levy override exploratory committee. And you know, what is really becoming the proposal and plan that we'll bring to the board in August. So we're going to talk about, we'll share a bunch of slides on the work and the why and where we're at. And then we'll open it up for some questions. So my name is Anna Cole. I'm superintendent. With me is Amy Brockman, Chief of Human Resources and Talent, and Christy Chicoine, Chief Financial Officer. And so we'll kind of share the presentation and different components of it as we jump in. Yes. Perfect. Okay. All right, well, let's jump on in. So let's start with how we got here, because if you've been in the Valley for longer than a couple of years, you might be feeling like, oh, this is familiar. You guys have done this before. You're right. In 2021, the Roaring Fork Schools passed a mill levy override to increase staff salaries. Our goal at the time was to get our staff salaries into the top third of comparison districts. We successfully passed that MLO. We thought it would be the max that we could ever go for. That was the rules at the state legislature at that time. And so for a short period of time, around 21, 22, we were up and in that top third of comparison districts. Since then, we've slipped, and there's a lot that's happened in those 4 years. One of, we've had challenges in terms of mitigating health insurance costs and managing inflation. There's been changes in the state funding formula. And then, of course, we're facing, as we are across the state, across the country, declining student enrollment. And if you've been watching the district's budget news 2 years ago, we identified, because of moving to a self-insurance plan, we had some over expenditures, and we had components of our budget that we weren't tightly able to see and manage. We've since then overhauled our financial practices. We addressed all those deficits, and are arriving, I would say, very comfortably heading into 26, 27 with our internal financial house in order. We'll talk more about that. And now the challenges that we're really facing as we've cleaned up internally, and a lot of that has to do with Chief Chicoine's leadership, Chief Brockman's leadership. We've strengthened our internal systems, rebuilt our finance and HR teams and processes, and we're in a much better position. And yet now our challenges are all external, and they're similar to what all our neighbors are facing in the state of Colorado and across the country. So we're at this interesting moment. There's been a lot of really great things happening in the district since 2021. In 2024, we launched a data-driven, publicly monitored strategic plan that's intended to really close the achievement gap and lift and strengthen educational academic outcomes for all kids. We're seeing that the intentional shifts we're making to really focus on instruction and learning and academic excellence, we're starting to gain a little momentum. We just got back our annual survey of our teachers and our faculty, and we had some of the highest positive ratings around high expectations for students and increased instructional kind of rigor and high quality education that we've ever seen in teacher feedback surveys. So some really great work that's happening internally in this work. And additionally, what we've seen is we've seen our schools continue to get better. In 2022, only 55% of our 14 schools were earning the highest rating on the state's academic performance framework. And this year we had 88% of our schools. So we're hoping to stay on that trend. Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we need.
Which schools are in that 12%?
Glenwood Springs Elementary School. Christy,
Yeah.
do you want to speak a little bit to some of the work we've done to kind of clean up our internal systems?
You bet.
So I started here in August of 2024, and we had some escalating health insurance costs. We had a self-insurance plan. And what we had to do is really move back to an insurance-based model for our health insurance to try to mitigate some of those costs and add some other budget solutions over the last 3 years to make sure that we have a balanced budget. We also restructured the finance department. We added a budget analyst position. And what we're doing is we're utilizing that as a high leverage investment to make sure that we are utilizing every dollar, to the best of our ability, as well as making sure that we're able to track every dollar so that our outcomes are really focused on the student-centered learning that Dr. Cole has talked about in previous slides.
Thanks, Christy.
So the other thing to look at too is when we have a very effective and efficient system, when we're looking at our budget, we have reduced a lot of our overhead costs, and we now have 85% of our funding going directly to our schools at $74.4 million, 8% going to facilities and transportation, and only 7% for all other central support. So we run a really tight ship.
I think any of you who have students in schools know that the most important thing for our students is to put a high quality teacher in every classroom. We just surveyed our families, and in that panorama family survey about school, the number one response about what makes your child's school a great place to learn and grow is dedicated and caring teachers. And that came in, just so much higher than all of the other responses. And so it really illustrates what we know to be true about what we need to do to achieve our outcomes. We see a clear link between the budget and this investment, and that's over there on the left, and our strategic plan, which is in the middle. We are in finishing out year 2 of a 5-year strategic plan, and we're really driving towards this outcome of improved student learning and achievement.
We're really proud of our faculty, the teachers and staff we have working with our students. Is the data that Amy just shared from our family survey. Our students, our families, our community loves our teachers. We're really, I think, really privileged to support a strong faculty and staff.
So we have a goal to recruit and retain high quality teachers and staff in our buildings. And the reality is that the way school funding works in the state of Colorado for us makes us fall short in our goal of being really competitive in order to attract and retain a thriving team. There are some barriers that will likely sound very familiar to people in the audience. Our health insurance costs are among the highest in the state of Colorado. They average about $6,000 more per employee per year compared to Front Range districts who have more healthcare options. We all know that cost of living is very high here in the Roaring Fork Valley, 7th out of 178 districts in Colorado. And our average teacher salary is lagging behind, especially for experienced teachers. We're about 11,000 behind our comparable districts who are similar in size and cost of living, and the average salary is between $5,000 and $6,000 behind. We know that when this combination of high cost of living and low salaries happens, it can result in high turnover. It is really hard when we put a big investment into our teachers and their professional learning, and then they leave us to go to neighboring districts, or they leave us to go to the Front Range, or even to other states in order to make it work. We suffer from unfilled positions, especially in hard to fill areas like special education, secondary math, and it puts principals in the hard position of having to fill positions with less qualified or experienced teachers. The cost of housing is also not surprising, but we have these statistics about if teachers want to stay and become homeowners, the average mortgage that a single teacher could afford is a little under $200,000, and two teachers together, dual income, an average mortgage that they could afford is around $400,000. This puts the closest average home ownership opportunity for our Roaring Fork School District staff in Parachute, because the average single family home value in our district is almost $1.4 million. And even if you're not in the home ownership market, and I know not everyone is, the average rent that a Roaring Fork School District teacher can afford is under $2,000, about $1,800. And the average price of a one-bedroom unit in our district is $2,000. And those prices increase if you go to a 2 or a 3-bedroom unit to $3,000 and $4,000. So even rent is out of reach for a lot of our employees.
So one of the really interesting questions, if you pay property taxes or you rent and your rent is set on property taxes, especially if you've watched the last couple of years, is a question that our community asks a lot, is like, wait a minute, my property taxes have increased substantially in the last couple of years. And I can see very clearly that money is going to Roaring Fork schools. Why are you asking for more funding? Because the increase of property taxes versus what we're saying as a district, there seems to be a tension there. And so it's a really important question that we want to address. And so Chrissy's going to explain a little bit about the Colorado funding context, and then a little bit of like how school finance works and why that is happening.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cole. So funding context, the state's funding calculations and formulas for property taxes are pretty much not understandable by anybody, but we try to do our best to explain exactly what it really means as far as funding for the district, and then just try to summarize it as best as we can. They've made it overly complex, and basically what they're doing with the way that the education funding formula currently works is they're taking a lot of the additional requirements of education plus some of the state funding requirements and dumping them on local taxpayers. And so that's generally what the trend has been over the last 5 years. But there's also this thing about adequacy, and the study about adequacy, and the Colorado School Finance Project does a tremendous job on looking at adequacy and what we really should as a school district receive in funding. And so this is where Colorado ranks lowest in the country in competitive teacher wages, because we are not adequately funded with the way that the state funds us. And despite being the 8th wealthiest state, we rank in the bottom half of states for per pupil student or school funding. And just looking that we're even lower than lower cost states, just because of how these mechanisms in the legislature has funded schools. And despite the rising property value, school funding has not proportionally increased. Okay, so, and I really love these graphics, and that tries to break this down for people on how this school finance funding formula generally works. So there's a statewide base per student funding amount multiplied by a funded student count. And then you add at risk, ELL, special ed, all these different variable populations at different percentages of funding increases, and then a cost of living factor, size adjustment, and then putting those all together, it gives you your total district funding. So this is what I was talking about a little earlier. When local property taxes increase, what happens to district funding? So right in 23-24, 74% of our funding was local and 26% was state, and a very, very tiny part of that being federal. Now we're up to 85% of local funding and only 15% state. So that just really underlines and underscores what has been happening in this trend over the last 5 years, that we continue to see an escalating amount of our funding coming from local sources. So although you guys are paying more money, the district is not seeing that in additional per student dollars. And that's the unfortunate part, is the state is using that to help fund its part of the budget for education. So, the other thing that's happened that was unfortunate is that there was a state policy change a couple of years ago through the legislature. And as you noted in the calculation that was talked about with School Finance Act, there is a cost of living factor in that. And that cost of living factor used to be a variable cost of living based upon averages and what was going on in each community. Well, they capped that cost of living. It actually cost the district a lot of money. And that was about a year and a half ago that took place. And now what they're doing is requiring at the state level, they're requiring us to go to our voters and ask for that funding back so that we can get that cost of living differential that other, I guess, other communities would just receive in their funding formula if they're not capped. So, for example, the cost of living that that Rifle in that area receives is about what our cost of living is here. That's how we're funded. So it's really changed with this, the way that they did the legislative change.
Yeah, jump in, because this is an important piece of like how we're able to even bring forward an MLO. So
Yeah.
jump in.
Right. So you say they, is that in the state?
Yes.
State of Colorado.
And so what they did when they took that funding away for the cost of living, then they increased our mill levy capacity, but we have to be able to pass a mill levy before 2030 to be able to keep that capacity at a higher rate to make up for that.
Is this on?
Mhm.
Okay. Wow. And so when I hand you $2,800, where does that money go? It doesn't go to that whole process?
Mhm.
I don't understand.
It's such a great question. So there's three funding sources for this per student funding dollar, where they come from. Specific ownership tax is one, which is what you pay with licensing fees and things like that.
Correct.
Then there's the property tax.
Mhm.
And the state formula requires right now, and the legislature requires that we get to 27 mills for our general funding. Okay. And then that's multiplied by the assessed valuation for the district. So if the assessed valuation goes up, then our local share just increases with that. So it doesn't reduce our mill levy number.
Wow.
So then the state, then there's the third part of the funding formula of where that comes from is from the state. And that's being diminished. A less and less percentage of that total program funding is coming from the state. And they're calling that a state equalization funding. So that's a backfill number to get to the amount that we're formulaically required to receive through the funding formula.
Per child.
So what they do is they'll run this formula and say, okay, Roaring Fork schools, you should get this much per student. And maybe Garfield RE2, Rifle, Newcastle, Silt, you get a little less because your cost of living's lower. Parachute, Battlement Mesa, Garfield 16 gets a little bit more because they serve maybe what we would consider a higher risk population. So then they take that number and say, this is what Roaring Fork schools should get per kid. And they say, okay, well, how much money can we raise in local property taxes? What are your property tax values? And they go, great. Okay, then the state will pay the rest. And what used to happen was our property taxes were lower. So they would set that number. Folks would pay their property taxes and the state would fill in the rest. And as our property tax values have increased, we pay more and more, but this number doesn't move. We're just saving the state money. It's just and when Christy talks about the local share, for us in the Roaring Fork schools, as property tax values have increased, the local shares just increased, and the state decreases. But that total district funding, the green for us has not changed. It's just who's covering the bulk of that, which has changed, which is why we, kind of trying to show this dollar, like the amount of the dollars doesn't really shift. It's who's contributing does shift.
Right. And so it'll never end. In other words, it's just gonna keep, right? Or is there?
There are districts, for example, like Aspen, where they set that number and the local share covers 100%. And so there are no state dollars at all.
Really?
Mhm. And that's the high cost. And so this is just the high cost districts.
Okay.
And so then to kind of double the pain for us as being the seventh highest cost of living, school district is, that little, I know it's a funny formula, but the cost of living factor, this is what Christy was talking about. We used to have a high cost of living factor for the state to say, okay, it's very expensive to live in the Roaring Fork Valley. And they set those numbers based on like how much it costs for a bag of groceries. And they have these formulas to set that. And what they did to save money overall was they said, hey, you know what, there's some high cost of living school districts, but we're going to drop that factor so that it can't be super high. Come on in, welcome, come join us. You're in the right place. And so they basically, what they did was, when we say they capped it, they reduced the amount of total dollars we could get because of our high cost of living. And they said, okay, so that overall just lowers your bar of what your student funding will be. And then they said, well, as kind of a consolation, you can go back to your local community and ask them for more dollars for a little bit of time. In 2021, we thought we had maxed what we could do with mills, and they raised the ceiling for the districts for whom the cost of living cap negatively impacted them. And so for what happened was, this actually started last year. Aspen School District had the cap and went back for a mill levy override. We're guessing a lot of school districts that have a high cost of living. So Vale, which is the Eagle School District to the east of us, Steamboat, Summit, which is kind of Breckenridge, Frisco, Telluride, are all doing what we're doing right now, which is exploring an additional mill levy because they've all had their cost of living factor capped. And so I'll name, and I want to move us to where we're headed, that, we do feel like if this is very frustrating, this is a state funding issue and there is a local solution, but we don't want to, I think our team feels a strong obligation to be very clear that this is putting a burden on our local communities. To say, we've already been living with increasing property values, increasing taxes, which haven't changed the revenue that we get. Now the state capped our cost of living. And now we get this consolation prize to go back to the community, but it's not lost on us that the solution was to go back to our community that's already carrying the bulk of our school funding. And so it's an uncomfortable position to be in, to go out into our community and say, we're struggling to stay competitive with our teacher salaries. Can we engage with you about this additional mill? And it also at the same time feels irresponsible not to, which is why we need to have these conversations and help people understand where we're at and why we're doing this. It's not something that we take lightly at all.
It's the same with the fire department. It's the same,
Yes, yes, very similar.
We always feel like they can't catch up.
Mhm.
I don't know what the answer is, but it's like, I have no more money.
Right. And
when
you're fixed and that is increase, or even when you're not fixed, we hire and staff 800 to 1,000 employees. We're not keeping up with inflation.
Right.
And, we try the best we can to move our salaries and a little bit each year, but we can't keep up. Most people can't keep up right now. So let me talk about the mill levy, and we can keep jumping in. These are great questions. So if you're new to this, a mill levy override is a voter approved local additional funding. It supports ongoing operations. It can fill gaps left by state funding. And these are, mill levy funds are restricted to the exact ballot language that voters approve. Oh, sorry, please.
Slides going to be available after the meeting?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the slides will be available.
Yeah.
Online.
Yeah, we have a website. We'll link to it and you can, we'll have them up there and we'll make sure you get them. And if not, you can email any of us. We'll send it to you directly.
There's a microphone right there that you can speak into at the table if you want to share.
We're recording so that the online folks can understand the questions too. Yeah.
So we're talking about this mill levy override and proposing this solution. And I like that thriving team is sort of foundational or at the bottom on this slide, because it really is our theory that if we are going to have students who graduate from our schools and they are ready to thrive in a changing world, it will make our community better. And it's our belief that we need to have the adults who are in front of them all day thriving as well in order to get there. So our uses for this mill levy override are restricted by law. And our plan, if we go forward with this, is to use them to increase staff salaries, strengthen our recruitment efforts, and improve retention for our staff.
So the proposed, excuse me, the proposed mill levy would be 4.5 million for the Roaring Fork School District specific non-charters, and then plus about $500,000 to internal charters. That allocation is based upon the number of students in those internal charters versus at the district. The estimated residential taxpayer annual impact is 1718 per 100,000 of actual home value, 85, 88 per $500,000 of home value per year. So then that is $1.43 per month per 100,000, or $7.15 a month for $500,000. The funds do stay here locally. That is part of the funding formula. So, I mean, it's not part of the funding formula. It is those funds go directly from a mill levy directly into the district's coffers. So how we would allocate the funds. So there would be 82% would be salaries and benefits. That's a very vast majority of it. Then there would be 10% for recruitment and retention initiatives, and 10% required by the district charter share.
And I recognize that those numbers don't math. So
Oh, yeah.
I just put a little note to myself, we'll correct that. It's
So
80%
yeah.
of the total would be
Yes,
salaries.
Thank you, yeah.
And then of that salaries, this is how we are proposing to break it down. Certified are our certified teachers. They're the largest employee group, and they are currently the group that's farthest behind on comparables to comparable school districts. Classified are your non-certified teachers, so our assistant teachers, early childhood, operations teams, nutritional services staff, everybody else that's not certified.
Those dollars are also confusing, but the blue shows the remaining 80%, right? And of
Yes,
that
of
80%,
Of that, yeah.
67% will go to certified staff, and 33% of the 80% will go to classified staff.
And in our current proposal, and again, this is just a proposal, and we'll talk about that. It all ultimately comes down first to the Board of Education's approval to move this forward. And of course, second, if it goes through the board, then it's up to the voters. Right now in our proposal, none of the dollars would be used for senior leadership salaries for this kind of senior leadership team. You know, I think Amy spoke to this a little bit in that we know that strong schools are critical to strong communities. It's tricky, but we know that strong schools will stabilize property values. It's not necessarily the problem we have right now because they're escalating quite rapidly. We know that strong schools attract families and employers, support the local workforce, strengthen long-term economy, and that we all benefit when we have really strong schools, and that's part of the ask.
Will the override sunset?
You know, our current thinking was that it would not. Christy, you want to talk through this?
Yes, you bet. Just looking at what is on the horizon at the state level, there is a Tabor ballot initiative on the ballot for November 2026 potentially. And what this would do is looking at the Tabor revenue cap. And what they were looking at doing is instead of providing refunds to voters and taxpayers, that the funding could go for increases for K-12 education. Instead, if this is passed, they would receive the funding instead of the Tabor refunds, like I just said. The potential uses are teacher pay and retention, lower class sizes, expanding career and technical education is what CTE stands for, or early childhood success. The specific use of these funds is not yet noted. We're undetermined. It just really depends on whether or not this passes and if it actually gets on the ballot and all of those kind of things still remains to be seen. But one thing to note is that when I talked a little bit earlier about the adequacy study that was completed through the Colorado School Finance Project, and what they're noting is that the district is $18.8 million underfunded currently. And so what that's saying is even with the Tabor, even with, a mill levy, that we're still not looking at adequately being funded based on that study. So it's just something to note there too.
Is there a plan for making up that difference to get to the 18.8%?
18.8 million,
Or 18.8 million?
there is that, no, they don't really have anything. The only thing that they're doing is they're changing the school funding formula where there will be some additional funding. And over time, it's going to be roughly 2 million or so in additional funding over the next maybe 5 years, depending upon how that looks. But they're phasing that in over time. And that is more looking at identifying those at-risk populations and funding more on those populations compared to the way that they have funded in the past.
And is that 18.8 million a year?
Yes, annually, yeah.
Yeah, so it was interesting that the state legislature commissioned these adequacy studies. They came back with these findings, but the state legislature now in 2 years since having these findings hasn't had a comprehensive plan to address the gap. And so this is, I think it was important for us to name that this is also a ballot initiative that we anticipate will come before voters, also similarly related. And so we want to make sure that folks feel informed about what's going on. We're continuing to track that to see where that ends up, but it is on our radar. So where we are, we're representing the district's mill levy override exploratory committee that also is made up of staff members and certified teachers and a large group of folks. And so our work really since kind of this winter till now has been to develop this proposal, to identify some potential uses of the MLO, to have a lot of meetings like this, to talk to staff, to have listening sessions, to finalize a plan that we would bring to the board at the end of the summer. So what we're going to be working on, this is kind of our last big community meeting for the year. We've been presenting to various groups around the district, but of the school year. So I anticipate we'll be talking a lot more about it after the summer, but over the summer, we'll be working to finalize ballot language that we would bring, kind of draft language to bring to the board, finalize details around impact, and then planning to bring to the board, probably at their first meeting of next school year in August, a proposal, like a formal proposal, really stamping this. We're still trying to gather feedback. These meetings really matter. We'll be presenting this update formally at the board with the board next week, but then anticipating a board decision at the end of August on whether we move forward with an MLO to put one on the ballot for November. And then, of course, it'll be a voter decision. So that's kind of where we go from here. A couple of things that we want to share with folks, lots of ways to get involved, to attend a reunion, to share comments, help educate others as information comes out. There is a survey that we have that's a lot of what from this presentation was missing, where would you like more information, what would help you better understand the rationale, the purpose. So we do have a survey, and I'll click to one other thing and we can then wrap. And then this is the link to our website. I'll make sure that this slide deck is updated on the site. We've done a couple of revisions of the site, so I'll make sure it's there. And if not, this slide deck will be in the public record for sure for the board meeting, but you can also just email me and I can send it to you directly. But would love to take additional questions. Would love to hear your thoughts. I wonder, Jonathan, is anybody online? Great. well, if it's okay with you guys, I think I'd love to stay on the mic so that those groups of folks that are paying attention can hear your additional questions or recommendations. And we can certainly pull up slides if you have specific questions, but would love to hear your thoughts and concerns. Yeah.
Well, and you'll be completely transparent, completely with everything. Transparency is a real good, I don't know if you can hear me. Transparent.
You know, it's interesting if you've been tracking Aspen. They went to the voters with a number of initiatives last year. They had a mill levy override, they had a sales tax increase, they had a bond. And there was quite a bit of tension. They passed all three, but then there was a lot of tension on what the voters thought they were voting for and what the intent of the dollars was. And we, especially this leadership team who has really worked hard, we're all new within our jobs in 3 years or less, and knew that we needed to really strengthen transparency and accountability in finance and HR and overall leadership. So it's a deep commitment we have. And if we ever needed even more reason to be very clear and transparent, I think we saw from Aspen's experiences that we need to be very clear and upfront with voters with what our intentions are, what the impacts are, and then honor that commitment on the back end and make sure that when we say this is, our current proposal to bring to the board is around staff salaries. And we need to make sure that, if voters support that those dollars are 100% doing exactly what we said they would do. We take that very seriously because it's not lost on us. And most of us live here as well and see the impacts of rising property tax values.
My other question is, where do your teachers come from? Do most of them have to live down Valley?
Yeah,
Some come from down
Do you-
Valley?
We have a mix and we have had a lot of success with our staff housing program, which does, how many units do we have?
we have 117 units currently.
Yes.
Our veteran staff largely have been able to find a solution to staying here, but in terms of recruitment, it is very challenging to help folks find housing and a long-term sustainable solution.
And it's such a good question, with 800 to 1,000 employees and with 117 units, it means we currently provide housing for about 12 to 14% of our staff. Last time we looked at the data, and I actually think we probably need to look at it again, and this was 2 or 3 years ago, we had about 25% of our staff living outside the district, predominantly in Western Garfield. So Newcastle, Silt, Parachute, Battlement Mesa, we even have folks that come in from Mesa County in Grand Junction. And for us, that's we need our staff to live and work where they teach. We want them part of the community. We want their lives and their kids to be in our schools. And I think the other piece that if you're watching the news and we know that declining enrollment, rising cost of living, health insurance costs, all of these housing, there's a lot of challenges we're facing. A mill levy override and this is not going to solve everything. It's one small piece of the puzzle. We're moving a number of strategies, and we have been since this leadership team came on board to really be very clear and transparent about our money, to really tighten our operations. Amy just led a comparable analysis of our district operating teams to make sure that we're not overstaffed at the DO. And after this study with comparable districts, every single one of our district office operational teams or the teams that we all lead are at or below median for all of our comparable districts. So we're not overstaffed in our DO. And that feels really important to us that your dollars are going to our schools, going to our kids. And so, we're really conscious of all these challenges and that we're going to need a lot of different types of solutions to address them. For example, just this year, we've done a lot of work in staff housing, 117 units, but it's clearly not enough. And so, but we weren't quite clear on what should be our next steps? What's the greatest need in staff housing? What's the best, investment that we can make, even though we actually don't have a lot of cash to invest in staff housing right now. And so we conducted a 10-year staff housing master plan that did a ton of research. A lot of the graphs you saw are from that staff housing master plan. It's publicly available and we can share it. And they were able to name the need, which for us was about an additional 360 units is what they projected we needed to add to our 117 to actually meet the need for housing for our staff. And they then evaluated some of the property that the district owns as what is going to be the highest leverage use of that property for staff housing, and what kinds of programs should we be investing in, because there's so many options. Are you looking for like a down payment assistance program, more rentals, or deed restricted home ownership like we did at Basalt Vista, kind of behind Basalt High School? So the plan really laid out for us the next 10 years of how to best leverage the resources we have, which right now are predominantly land. We don't have cash to invest in staff housing. So we're starting to move on the plan, which leads us off with, we're working on a project that'll come before the board for an MOU. We talked about it at the work session at our last board meeting. The first project on the staff housing master plan is a development with property that we own as the Roaring Fork Schools, kind of near Blue Lake, kind of near Blue Lake and Algebel, where we're going to look at various partnerships where we can bring the land and then various partners bring the capital to build, that'll create affordable home ownership programs for staff. So that's going to be the first project. So that's, for example, that's just one solution to address one challenge. We see this as one solution to address one challenge, but we're going to have to be creative and dynamic to face all of this, because it's going to be a really interesting next 5 and 10 years.
But the deed restricted housing doesn't prevent people from them going to work in Aspen at some point.
Well,
Going to work somewhere else.
Such a good question. It depends on how you set it up and what those restrictions are. Do you, like, for example, the units that we have behind Basalt High School, which we call the Basalt Vista program, the way that partnership worked, Roaring Fork Schools had the land, Pitkin County brought the infrastructure, and Habitat for Humanity brought the kind of capital to do the build. And they're deed restricted affordable housing, and the stipulations there are Pitkin County kind of, their staff have access to certain number of housing units. Roaring Fork Schools does. For our units, you have to work for the Roaring Fork Schools. Now, the Pitkin County ones, I think you have to work in Pitkin County. So you could potentially work for the Roaring Fork Schools in Pitkin County, but they're slightly different. But a lot depends on how you set up those rules.
And is there enforcement?
There is. I mean, for us, I can only speak to the houses that we manage, and we work with a property management company for all of our rental units and our housing. I mean, kind of the amazing thing is that we require on these units that payments come from an employee's paycheck. And so we know when somebody doesn't work for us anymore, they're done and they can't pay for those units. And so it moves on. But that is the way our current housing is structured.
And is there a way to require that their kids go to the Roaring Fork Schools as well?
Gosh,
Probably not.
No, unfortunately, no. And it is an interesting tension. I mean, we have the gift and the challenge in the Roaring Fork School District region of school choice. We have a lot of diverse schools. We have a lot, I mean, Carbondale, there's like 5 elementary schools in this little tiny town. And so and that does have an impact on where people choose to go to school, and enrollment, as you saw, enrollment drives our revenue. And so that matters. And we also know that competition creates better schools, and that parents are looking for the appropriate fit for their kids. It's a tough conversation. And I think where we always lean and find solace is, like, our job is to create the best, highest quality schools we possibly can, and to convince everybody that they want to stay with us. But it's hard. Oh, like how we hit the cap? Great question. Okay. Yeah, thanks. And then I'll actually let Christy answer that question. Yeah, ask it again so we can.
Sure. In 2021 and 2022, you guys had a mill levy. I think it was like $1.8 billion when it was frozen by the state. Do you know that that's just the mill levy, which measures the property tax rate based on the total value of all property in the district, valued at roughly $1.82 billion? That's the entire value of all the property supposedly here. So the question is, why was that frozen? The mill levy frozen?
I don't know. Go. Yeah,
I can
please.
answer that. So property tax, there's three different ways there's three different funding streams from property tax. First is for our bond redemption fund, is for repayment of debt for voter approved buildings, pretty much in construction. So that's not what we're talking about. There's also the mill levy overrides, that's this whole forum. This is requesting an additional, and that has not been capped. Those mill levies are what's called floating up and down depending upon the assessed valuation and the dollars that are approved by voters. And how the question was approved for each one of the mill levies. The one I think you're talking about is from the general fund. And that's the total program funding that we were talking a little bit earlier about, related to our per student funding at the state level. And the mills are capped at 27 mills. And so this year we're at, I think, 26.8 mills for that. And then next year we're going to be up to that 27 mills. And that is the legislative requirement because we were supposed to have been increasing that 1 mill per year until we got to the 27 mills. And so to answer your question, that is a legislative requirement according to state law that we actually fund that at the 27 mills. And that is a flat mill levy rate. And that, unfortunately, is why the state continues to garner or require less and less funding. We have less and less funding from the state, and we have more that is required from our local property taxpayers because of the increases in assessed valuation. So that the mill levy rate times the higher assessed valuation is paying for more and more of the district's funding.
So in 2024, you assessed a mill levy at 41.797 mils.
Okay, and those are
You
those
increased.
combined. Yeah.
Right, in 2024, and now it's 2026, and we're increasing it again. At what point do we exhaust the funds of the locals who live here? Because, we're looking at rising property values, and that's an arbitrary number based on what we think values are versus what they really are. And in a great economy and everything, when everything's cooking along and we've got jobs and people are working and we get more students that are coming in that need school, maybe that's not so much of a problem. But you guys are having a problem getting students to come to school. And now you're asking us to kick more money in. So when do we dry up?
That's such a great question. It's such a great question. Yeah, and how far does this ceiling go? In
You're talking
2021,
10 years now.
100%. In 2021, we thought we had hit the cap of what we could mill locally.
Sure.
And so that was, a lot of the communication around 2021 and the mill levy override was like, this is it. This is as far as we can go. And so I think it was very interesting to a lot of those school districts who then saw the reduction because of cost of living to have the state legislature then open up and raise the ceiling. So we had thought that the 2021 mills that we set and that the voters approved, that was it. That's the cap, that we can't go any further. And now the legislature changed the rules, dropped our total funding, said you can go back to your voters to raise it. And I think, you're lifting up, I think, one of the tension points that feels sticky and hard about this, which is this structural issue at the state not funding schools appropriately. And then the negative impact of the reduction of the cost of living factor has put us in a position where we're getting less revenue from the state and do feel a little bit pushed to come back to our communities who are already contributing more and more because of the property values to say, hey, one more time, could you help us out? It's a tough position. One of the interesting pieces, this mill levy is about half of the impact of the 21. And so sometimes there's the argument, well, it's not that big. It's, whatever, $1, the numbers you saw the impact, but it's still an impact. Nobody's keeping up with inflation, and it's a great question. I don't have a great answer. I mean, we can explain it and it feels sticky. And it also, when we're tasked with ensuring that we continue to run high quality schools. We know that when our teachers can't afford to live here and we can't continue to have competitive salaries, they leave. And the negative impact financially on trying to recruit and retain and train new teachers is substantial. When we've invested, especially in new teachers, we invest a lot in coaching and onboarding and supporting them. And as Amy spoke to earlier, when they pick up and leave 3-5 years because they can't see their lives here, it undermines the quality of what happens in the classroom and it hurts kids. And so it's a hard tension point. I think at the end of the day, we feel stuck delivering the highest quality education possible for our students, knowing the stressors on recruiting and retaining high quality people to stay in front of them. And I think it's that at the end of the day that has us kind of coming back out to our community saying, would you support us again? But it's not without I feel like a heavy and somewhat conflicted approach, because we don't take it lightly what we're asking our community to do. Perfect. Why don't you follow up? Because I think similar line. Continue with that question and then let's add that one from online. Is that okay? Okay, great. Thanks, Jonathan. Perfect. Go ahead.
So one of the things is, have you considered the private investment possibility of investing in this property, getting other people's money, tax, credits, anything on the private side where you're not going, it's more of a bond type thing to cover a lot of the costs and then, pay back to the community instead of just keep on asking for handouts.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I don't know enough about that to speak to it. I don't know. I mean, we definitely look at, we definitely leverage like grant funding and looking at donor funding. We work really closely. We are so privileged to have the Carbondale Basalt and Glenwood Springs Education Foundations that work really closely with us and have an important role to play in really strengthening what our schools are capable of. But I don't know that we've looked at more kind of like private business interests. I don't know, Christy, if you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have just started to look into this tax credit initiative at the federal government that has been approved at the state of Colorado and most other states within the nation. And one thing that, first of all, we don't have, it's not fully baked about what we would do and how we'll manage this. That's what Anna talked about a little bit earlier, is that we have a lot of different challenges that we are trying to solve for together all at the same time. Housing and, staff salaries and health insurance and trying to figure out a way to increase supplies for kids and opportunities for students. And the things that I've been discovering on that, those tax credits, is that that one's probably going to help solve more for the opportunities for students than it will for staff salaries. That's going to align better to what we're trying to do for kids and give various and different opportunities and reduce the costs for, educating kids to parents, that for field trips or for fees and that kind of thing. But we don't have that fully baked yet, but it is something we are looking at.
Online question? Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I noticed you guys in your I guess it was the email flyer that came out that this was going to go into infrastructure and trying to keep schools open. And then now it seems like this is steering more towards a staff and wages and all that, which those are very important things. But I'm kind of curious about, with this action, which I think is a great thing that you guys are trying to implement because of the situation you guys have been placed in, that this mill levy override is, I believe it's a good move for you guys to do, but I'm also curious about the sustainability of, let's say, Basalt area schools and the culture that goes around with that, and the teachers that are staffing those schools, and how that's going to affect, Basalt area schools.
Great question, Brent. And, I will name that, if we sent out communications that alluded to the mill levy override going to anything other than salaries, that was an error. So I just want to name that because the exploratory committee from the get-go has said the purpose of this should be staff salaries, recruitment and retention. So I do want to make sure that that's clear. And if we made that error, Brent, I'm sorry. Brent, you're speaking to, I would say, another one of the big challenges that's facing us, and that is declining student enrollment. We are not unique in what we're seeing in trends across the state of Colorado and the country. And they're more pronounced in the state of Colorado. In our high cost mountain rural districts, we're seeing declining enrollment similar to the state overall, but often steeper. And you're right, Brent, when we look at the Roaring Fork Valley and the Roaring Fork schools writ large, we're currently even within our district seeing more pronounced declines in Basalt, which we perceive, and it's hard to understand all of it. I think it's a complication of multiple factors, including birth rates, cost of living, kids moving to online opportunities, kids moving outside the district to other schools that are not within our district. And we are seeing kind of precipitous declines in Basalt. I would say in what we're seeing across the state and across the country is often one of the strategies that districts are using is school reorganization, school consolidation, those kinds of decisions where you're really saying, the kinds of learning environments that our communities want for our kids. There can be a point at which they come up against economies of scale where we say we want to offer all the programs and all the special classes, and that gets harder and harder to do as schools get smaller. And so there's a point at which there can be at this decision of, are we able to offer the kinds of schools we want and have them be very small? And that is, we're not ready for that conversation yet. I think our optics on declining enrollment has really only seen 2 years worth of data. Our enrollment was kind of holding pretty steady, increasing, and then we hit the dip that everybody did at COVID, and then we started climbing right back up. And 24-25 was the first school year. And we always think of it in terms of October count, the fall enrollment. There's this special series of dates where you get your official number of kids that's reported to the state that then generates your revenue. And it really wasn't until 24-25 that we started to say, hey, wait a minute, we're actually declining. We were building budgets that were assuming we would increase. And 24-25 was the first year in that we realized, oh, wow, we're actually going down. We're not even holding steady. And that compounded the issues that Christy spoke about in 24-25 with health insurance. And then we started to see these declining enrollments. And so we saw declines in 24-25. We engaged with a demographer to start helping us better understand trends and projections. We anticipated declines in the current year in 25-26. And we built our current year's budget off of demographers' projections. They actually weren't low enough. We came in even lower. So thank goodness we built our budget with lower declines. And so now we've had these 2 years of seeing these trends in declining enrollment. Our demographer has run out 5 and 10-year trends. It feels a little early for us to be engaging with our community around school efficiency until we see at least another cycle of enrollment. Those are big conversations that you have about school efficiency. What do we want for our kids? Are we able to provide it with schools of this size? We make choices as a community of the kinds of schools we want. And in the Roaring Fork schools right now, we've all inherited choices from leadership and community ahead that came before us to say we want very community-based schools. It's an interesting thing that we talk about a lot in the district that, there was a moment when Carbondale District High School became Roaring Fork High School because there was a moment where they were going to combine Basalt and Roaring Fork High School. And so that's why it's called Roaring Fork High School. Ultimately, our communities decided, nope, it's more important for us to have community-based schools. And so, we're really tracking carefully numbers in Basalt. We're really tracking carefully numbers across the district at large. We're very, very interested. We've built this year's budget off of conservative projections. We're worried. that maybe they weren't conservative enough. So we're going to be paying close attention in August and September when we're looking at student counts. And I would say, Brent, to your question, that if we get to this point after 3 years of declining enrollment sometime next fall, and we start to feel like, hey, you know what, we need to be talking about school efficiency. What happens is then you engage in a process that is open and clear and transparent with community, saying, here's what we're up against. Here are the risks. Here's the choices we're making about choosing small schools, or do we want to look at other options where we have, where we can look at school reorganization and larger schools that can do more. But that would all happen with very clear and open conversations, series of community meetings. And we're just not ready for that. We need to see numbers at least one more fall. So I would say, Brent, on that, it's definitely on our radar. We're watching other districts navigate this. We really need to see the numbers. Those are big, serious conversations, and we need to know that the trend, that we've kind of got a better hold of the trends. But it's tricky, and you're seeing this all over the country right now. I know we're close to time. Any last minute questions, and then I'd love to share contact information if things come up for you all after today.
Have you done any surveys or polling around this?
Great question around the MLO. We actually haven't, when we started our exploratory committee, which was again made up of a pretty diverse group of staff and representatives, and we have a board member on the team, really began with this idea on, we think the biggest issue that this could address is staff salaries and our struggle to stay competitive and recruit and retain staff. And what we did was we consulted with a lot of our partners at the state level, the Colorado Department of Education, the Colorado School Finance Project, and we said, hey, we're thinking about exploring this MLO. We're thinking about, our current priority is really staff salaries, recruitment and retention efforts. And the advice that we were given was, in the state of Colorado, that tends to poll well. Don't waste your money on polling. And so we chose to stick with that advice. Anything else, Christy, that you'd want to share with that? But that's really why we chose not to do it.
It's always going to be a roller coaster ride. You're always going to be upset. The fear I have is, I've been here since 63. This was my high school. And the average seniors are relying on Social Security and maybe a pension. I have a small fire pension, but we make $3,000 a month between my husband and I, and he's handicapped, so he's not able to work. So I'm his home caregiver, but I'm paying $5,000 or more in property taxes. And I just don't know how we're going to bring the fact that it's just still going up. Houses that should not be over $585,000 or $850,000 are going for $1 million plus. I don't know how we're going to get that under control because I want quality teachers. I've lived through a lot of teachers that weren't. I've brought up 3 children in this valley from daycare to CMC. Many kids, Mavis and Evelyn, some more. But I don't know, there's got to be some other players somehow. And how do you do that how could you do that? And then just make the list very clear for the voter, very direct and very opaque, like you said, very transparent. I don't know what else, because you're doing a great job. I commend you all. You're doing a really good job.
Thank you.
I've seen a lot of teachers come and go. And I mean, and some teachers I kicked out personally, seriously, and coaches as well. So more power to you. I just don't know how we're going to do it. I'm not sure how much more income I can make in my circumstances, that is. I could sell my house. I've been offered $2 million for it. It's not worth $2 million. Even though it has, I know, but I don't want to leave. And so it's the property. So if somehow, I don't know how you can harness, you have so many balls in the air. I just don't know how when we get past, and I know people are feeling stressed totally. Wait till you're 68 or 70 or 80. It's like, oh my gosh, now what? And I've done all the volunteer work and all the donation and all the paper drives and everything to help fund the school system. What do you do now? Except this.
Right, except
Right.
try to like
Yeah.
be really clear,
Yeah.
help folks understand where we're at, stay open to the feedback, because it's not, you're right, like this is one possible solution, but it's contextualized into a bigger system that has people very, very pressed and makes this, it can be a very hard swallow, even when you love the schools, you support the schools, you care about our community, you care about teachers. It can still be a point at which our voters say it's too much.
Well,
And I
just to illustrate,
100%. Yeah.
it's kind of like, what do you do? Yeah, you can sell, but then where do you go?
Well, not only that, I
Leave here.
feel that selling is at the last resort because I want to support the whole, I mean, we've been here from day one. I've seen Carbondale come from a little tiny town to this, and I'm happy with it, just most of it. But I'll be quiet. I mean, I literally the side streets were all dirt. I grew up here. So my heart is with this community, always has been. And I love the children. We ran a halfway house for wayward teenagers in the 80s. And my husband and I did auto mechanics and baking for kids that were bored because the schools weren't keeping up with and entertaining these children, and they were bored. And they get in trouble, and they get in trouble with the law. So your whole investment in a child is the whole spectrum. But then the sad thing is, once you've invested that, it'd be nice to get that return somehow with stability. I don't know how to do that.
Right. And
I've
that's,
thought about it.
yeah.
And the only thing that I would say, this is something that I really wish that at a state level, they would really look into this and pursue this deeper, is that, have you ever heard of the Homestead Exemption Act?
Yes.
Is to increase those dollars that are the minimum. I think it's at 200 or 250,000. Don't
Yeah.
quote me, something like that, but it's
Okay.
at a fairly low number for seniors. And I really believe that at the state level that number should be increased, especially given what's happened with overall property values and looking at 20%, 16 to 20% increases every other year cycle in the actual value of a home. I mean, it just seems like 200 to 250,000 is, exemption is a drop in the bucket for seniors.
Right. My husband gets 500 off of a house that the county says is 950 value this year. But as far as the market goes, the sky's the limit. So he does get that feedback, but it's that kickback. But the problem is they're still $661 higher than they were last year.
Right.
Which is still not.
It doesn't even make up to that increase in valuation that is coming in. They really need to continue to allow that homestead exemption to continue at the escalating values of property. It should not be staying at the same amount.
Right. And we've said that. I've contested that. We also keep track of the legislator, the senators and stuff. So we've been trying really hard there. I think that might be another thing that you might want to voice out. People don't always know quite what to do.
Right. And where to share that feedback with the state. That's a helpful push, because it is a bigger system that we're up against, and looking for a local solution, but it's part of this bigger system.
Right.
Y'all have been so generous with your time, and I know folks are online, so I want to wrap it up, but happy to stick around if there's additional questions or information. If we're doing anything right, and if we're going to solve any of this, it's because of these kinds of conversations. We get smarter every time we get to talk to people and they share considerations and whatabouts. And so I just want to name how grateful we are for your engagement, for your questions, your pushes, and just being here and part of this work. I think we all feel a really strong sense that our schools are held by everyone, and it's going to take all of us to figure out how to navigate the coming years, because they're going to be tricky, and we're going to need creative solutions, and we're going to need a lot of
Are
folks.
you getting a lot of
table.
feedback? Do you get a lot of?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's often in these small meetings where we get the best input and feedback and folks are showing up to the table as they're able. I mean, I think we're all also time pressed. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much. Thanks for the time.
Question about,
Yeah.
the numbers,
You can,
sorry.
no, it's
Um,
okay. We'll end the recording, but please go on.
Well, I remember